engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
Welcome to this episode of Pure Reinvention, episode 118. Can you believe it? We have been at this and have done 118 podcasts. We have not run out of material, and it certainly looks like we're going to have lots of things to talk about for a long time. I'd like to welcome my co-host, Jody Schaefer, HRM Services, for the month of April. Thanks for doing this, Jody.
I feel like I've been away too long, so I've been hearing a lot of new voices on the co-hosting, and it's always fun as a listener, so happy to be back at it.
Jody, the month of April is where we start to focus on step 2 in the reinvention process, which is ownership.
Yep. So April starts the second quarter, and actually we'll be focusing on ownership for the entire quarter. And this month, we have a couple really great interviews, and so it's the idea of ownership, but ownership specifically in a nonprofit or a not-for-profit setting.
Those are the podcasts that we were able to capture in it, and they were phenomenal. So you'll really be able to look forward to those in the weeks to come. With ownership being step 2 in the reinvention process, with disrupt being step 1. When we hear the word own, what does that say to you?
Ownership, I think, requires a certain amount of dedication and energy, sustained energy, because when you have that initial disruption and it can cause some excitement and you get around the table and you start talking about what we want to do differently or what we want to do next, there's a buzz around that, and you'll find that several folks around the table get excited and want to be a part of it. But ownership is really the work that comes after the excitement wears off, right? It's the person or people that really take hold of something and are invested in seeing it all the way through, which is not always fun and it's not always easy, but they have to have that very clear focus and buy-in beyond just the initial sparkle of the idea.
I think that's exactly right. I think a word that comes to mind for me is the word accountable. It's who in this process is going to be the one that says, I will make sure this happens. And when we see different successes and we track back the ownership, it's usually a small club, but a very, very important one, because everybody kind of looks to that individual to be the one to hold everyone else accountable and to keep that focus and that energy moving forward.
Which in a nonprofit setting could be key members of your board, which certainly having an active board is going to be a big part of that. But it's the leader of the organization as well. And Dr. Truman Hudson is one of the interviews that you'll hear this month. And he talks about how a leader's job is not only to be a cheerleader for the mission, but more importantly, it's to be the fiduciary for the organization. And so that ownership piece is really key. And that's why sometimes you have leaders that really push organizations to the next level, and you have leaders that don't. Right. And it comes down to own.
And let's make sure that when we talk about leaders, we're not talking about those that are designated as leaders.
Although it's helpful if the designated ones do step up and lead.
But we're really talking about those individuals who are behaving as owners rather than have the designation, because we all know of individuals who have perhaps the designation, but maybe aren't behaving.
Right.
And the power of those in leadership roles, whether it's at the board level or at a staff level, where you can own your own work and have a significant influence on the success of the company because of your ownership of your own space.
Right.
So I want to kind of talk a little bit, Jody, about how we apply ownership in a couple of various settings. We've got a couple of great podcast guests this month that will talk about their own experiences. But let's talk about nonprofit ownership for a minute, and this sense that if we're nonprofit, we're nonprofit.
Yeah. I mean, you and I, so preparing for this particular short, Mike and I were talking, and Will as well, who's always behind the helm here, about, we've been saying this forever just because of our work. Both of us work with several clients that are nonprofit, and a significant portion of each of our books of business are made up of nonprofit clients. And for us, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit, at the end of the day, it's a business and it needs to be run as such. A nonprofit just has the added benefit of having a compelling mission. But at the core, you still have to have a clear strategy. You have to be connected to your marketplace. You have to make sure that your mission changes as the marketplace changes. And there are a couple great examples in some of the podcasts that you'll hear this month that dive into that a little bit further. But it's this idea that nonprofit, if anything, it becomes even more important that what you're doing can be sustained over the long haul.
I think that is a great, great thought, because we kind of override the business with the mission. And you have to have the mission. That's your reason for being in existence. Right. But it isn't all about the mission, because you have to have a robust economic model behind that mission.
Right.
This is an interesting thought I have seen by behavior, too many to even count. Board meetings where the entire focus of the board is on the deviations to the budget, maybe focusing on small line items, and seldom is there discussion about the long-term robustness of the business's ability to grow, to stay relevant, and to be in a position where they can continually reinvest from the profits of their business to the benefit of their members.
Yeah, well, and we've talked about, several nonprofits that we have worked with or that we know of where they build a rainy day fund, because that's important. You have to have reserves because, you're going to have ups and downs. But they build a rainy day fund and they just like to see that number grow, and they sit on it. And there's no real plan for how you're going to reinvest some of those dollars back into the organization to take it to the next level. So they get comfortable doing what we've always done and operating on a budget that we've always had, and almost this pride in how we can operate on a shoestring. We're a really effective nonprofit if we operate on a shoestring.
Right. Spend the least amount of money as possible.
Yeah, and the reality is, could you have a greater impact if you took some of those dollars, invested it in your resources, your talent, your exposure, and making money is not a bad thing. When you're in a nonprofit, it doesn't mean you don't make money. It just means that you take those dollars and you reinvest them in other programs. So you don't walk away with a profit at the end of the day, but making money and being profitable on your programs should be an expectation.
Well, and your business cycle becomes extremely strong when you're in that role. So when you get into the role of declining resources.
Yeah.
And that's right, step one many times, in that the business has got some really serious danger signals. But if you're in that place of declining revenues, declining customer base, profit or nonprofit, that suggests some deviation from the standard course. And instead of board members focusing on how do we save money to survive, and that's not a bad exercise short term, the more long term and much, much more important exercise is how do we break out of this pattern, and how do we ensure to our members' benefit that this association or this business is going to be here for the next 10 years, for the next 20 years, for the next 30 years. And what are we doing today to reposition the business to make sure that we get there, which usually means for almost anything in our world that we do, personal or business, that we have to reinvest. How many of us have homes where we continually have to be reinvesting in that asset, or it becomes a eroding asset that's depreciating and it starts to fall apart?
Yep.
It's a constant responsibility that leaders have to own to make sure that that entity, a home, a business, is strong and is in peak performance.
Right. Thriving and looking forward to what's next and positioning themselves so they can actually take that next step when clarity surrounds it.
Have you enjoyed our Pure Reinvention podcast? Are you ready to begin your own Pure Reinvention journey? Join our next Starters Experience May 4 through 5 and May 24 through 25 in Detroit. Learn the 5 fundamentals in an engaging and interactive way. Contact us at PureReinvention.com today.
So let's, Jody, talk about, in closing out this segment, let's talk about something that's really cool that's going to be going on in Detroit in May of 2017 that helps people get some clarity around this discussion that we're having today.
So disruption is something that I think happens to all of us, and it's not always a planned thing. But once disruption happens and you start to realize that you've got to do something differently, Or maybe you're at a point in your professional career where you just want to do something differently. Figuring out how to put that plan together and creating some space for you to actually focus on that is hard to come by. And so the Pure Reinvention team has long thought that we need to develop a space where people can come and then we can create some connection between those individuals and real life stories that are happening in the world around them. So it's much more experiential so that they can have the excitement and the energy and the focus to create a plan so they can start taking these next steps. And that's called Starters. So Starters is taking place in May in Detroit, and it's a 3-day experience, but we split it up into 2 1.5-day segments with some coaching and some action plan stuff in between to really give people a jump start on their what's next.
So if you're ready to own then your next executive development opportunity, May 4 and 5, May 24 and 25, we'd like to hear from you now. We are filling those seats. We have one for you, but you got to let us know now. If you're waiting for an executive development opportunity which allows you to invest and experience some of the more dramatic, career-changing case study work that you'll do in order to help you discover and put your own or your business's action plan to the next level, then Starters is the experience for you, and we'd be happy to have you with us on that journey.
Yep. So you can go to PureReinvention.com to learn more about that, or hello@PureReinvention.com if you want to just drop us a quick line, and we'd be happy to follow up and get you all the details.
Or if you'd like to call my cell phone direct, 517-449-0457. If you're ready for a change, make it a change that lasts. Make it Pure Reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter @Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at PureReinvention.com.